The day of my sister Mia's wedding was the day her rapist got out of prison. Well, look at that. Someone wants my sloppy seconds. Frank Miller, the man who had destroyed my family, was crashing the reception. "Hey, everyone," he bellowed. "She's just my used goods." Groom's family was all about appearances. They called the wedding off on the spot. My son is a college graduate with a bright future. How is he supposed to hold his head up after this? His mother shrieked. "Where there's smoke, there's fire," someone muttered. "Look at the way he's acting." Maybe she was into it. Back then, the whispers, as always, were aimed at the victim. But Frank wasn't done with us. He started hovering around our house like a fly on garbage, shouting through a bullhorn. Day and night, the little slut, I had my way with lives right there. "Not moving, huh? Waiting for me. Mia, don't be shy. We were good together, weren't we? Come on out and have some fun." He was a ghost. We couldn't exercise. But then a few days later, something strange happened. Frank Miller mysteriously disappeared. The last ping from his cell phone was traced to a location near my house, to the very same alley where he had committed his crime 10 years ago. On a bitter winter night, Mia was dragged into that abyss was colder than I'd ever known. I remember holding my sister sobbing helplessly. The shock sent our mother into a stroke. She passed away on Mia's 17th birthday. Just like that. We were orphans. And now he was back. In the middle of the night, Frank was still outside, his voice booming. "Mia, stop hiding. You had the guts to point me out to the cops. And now you're gonna pay the price." I held Mia tight, clamping my hands over her ears. Her body was ice cold, devoid of any warmth. Just like that day when I found her lying in the snow. "Riley," she whispered, her voice hollow. "What did I do wrong?" She looked up at me, her eyes empty of life. I didn't have an answer. Why did the shame always become a weapon to torture the victim? My heart felt like it was being shredded. Around 2 in the morning, Frank must have gotten tired, because the world outside finally fell silent. After washing up, I went upstairs to my room. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint noise came from the wardrobe across from my bed, a soft rustling sound like fabric rubbing together. At first, I thought it was a mouse. Our house was in a rundown part of town, one of the last holdouts against a new development project, and the sanitation wasn't the best. Then, in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, I saw it, a sliver of a man's clothing caught in the crack of the wardrobe door. There was someone in my closet, and I was watching me through the slit. My heart hammered against my ribs. A tremor ran through my entire body. Frank was wearing a mouse gray shirt today. I fought to control my shivering, pretending to roll over in my sleep under the cover of my blanket. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. As fast as I could, I typed a message to my sister. "Run. Frank is here." I had to protect Mia. I would not let him hurt her again. The moment I hit send, my phone let out a crisp ding in the dead silence of the night. The notification sound was deafening. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I forgot to put it on silent. It was too late. A strong hand shot out from the darkness, clamped around my ankle, and yanked. I was dragged brutally from the bed. Frank's strength was monstrous. He grinned as he pinned me down. I struggled with all my might, kicking and thrashing, trying to jab him with my elbows. It was useless. He grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanked my head back, and slammed it against the hardwood floor. Bam! A blinding pain shot through the back of my skull. Black spots danced in my vision, and a wave of nausea nearly made me pass out. The ugly face of the man above me multiplied into a dozen overlapping images. I had thought about it 1,000 times. What if I had been the one to go out that night, take the delivery to our aunt's place? Is this what Mia went through? Just then, I heard footsteps outside my door. "Riley, is everything okay?" Mia's sleepy voice called out. She didn't see the text. I kicked my legs, uselessly shaking like a fish on a chopping block, trying to make some kind of noise to warn her. Frank's hand clamped down on my throat, cutting off any sound. "Run." I squeezed out a desperate wisp of air, but it was too faint to hear. Tears blurred my vision. In my despair, I heard a soft click. The doorknob was slowly turning. 2 weeks after Frank Miller's disappearance, his wife filed a report against me. "My cousin lives in the same neighborhood," Sharon Miller told the police. He said, "On the night my husband went missing, that little bitch was chopping meat all night. Buckets and buckets of bloody water being thrown out. She definitely killed my husband." No one paid her much attention. When a low-life criminal who drank, gambled, and beat his wife goes missing, most people see it as a good thing. Few days later, Detective Morgan came by for a routine follow-up. By then, my sausages were made. Our self-built house had 3 stories and a large, converted smokehouse out back. The metallic smell of blood still lingered faintly in the air. On the bamboo racks in the front yard, Links of sausage were hanging to dry in the cool air. Plump, firm, their dark reddish-brown skins glistening. They hung in dense, fragrant clusters. But Detective Morgan, with his years of experience, noticed something off. I don't. Most people make sausage before the holidays. Why are you making it now after the New Year? I answered calmly. We were busy with wedding prep before. Didn't have time then. Well, all that happened, and the wedding was called off. Suddenly, I had a lot of free time. What else was I going to do? A look of apology crossed the detective's face. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring up a sore subject. Seeing his true colors now is better than finding out later, I said. I had a lot of respect for Detective Morgan. He was the first officer on the scene 10 years ago. He was on patrol nearby when the call came in. I'll never forget the image of him carrying my sister to the ambulance. Sharon Miller said you bought a large quantity of salt and bourbon the day after her husband disappeared. Salt for curing, bourbon for flavor, and to cut the gaminess. I said with a small smile. Store-bought ground meat is mushy. No texture. You have to chop it by hand. I guess it makes a bit of noise. Is she accusing me of disturbing the peace, detective? If you look around, you'll see there isn't much peace to disturb. I gestured around us. Our neighborhood was a ghost of its former self. Most of the houses had been flattened by bulldozers. Only a handful of residents remained. Frank's harassment wasn't just about revenge. It was about the demolition. Our home was located in a prime area, slated for a new development project. Developers were desperate to clear us out, but their offers were insulting, and a few of us stubbornly refused to sell. We became the nail houses, the last holdouts. The developer hired Frank to persuade us, to ruin our reputations and force us out. His wife, Sharon's brother, is the developer's right-hand man. After what happened to my sister at my mother's funeral, Sharon brought a group of people. She screamed at me, accusing me of seducing her husband and getting him sent to jail. I had clutched my mother's urn, curled up like a shrimp on the floor, letting them kick and hit me, refusing to let go. Now, about 20 or 30 households who refused to sell had all been targeted by Frank Miller. In one way or another, when you do a lot of bad things, you tend to attract a lot of ghosts. Detective Morgan, Frank was a drunk and a degenerate. Disappearing for a few days is normal for him. Sharon is just using this as an excuse to frame me. I'm asking you to investigate this thoroughly and clear my name. Detective Morgan agreed. He checked the smokehouse and the kitchen. He was about to leave. Our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, burst in, holding a piece of cooked sausage. She was furious. My heart skipped a beat. Riley, what the hell did you put in this sausage? My grandson nearly broke a tooth. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I instinctively glanced at Detective Morgan. In Mrs. Gable's hand, nestled in the sausage, was half a human tooth. My mind flashed back to that night 2 weeks ago. On the verge of death, the doorknob had stopped turning. Mia's voice came from the other side, calm and even. I'm tired, Riley. Going back to bed. She turned and left. There wasn't a ripple of emotion in her voice. I was relieved, but a sliver of doubt pricked at me. Did she really not hear anything? As her footsteps faded, Frank let out a triumphant smirk. Just as he was about to rip my shirt, the door swung open without a warning. Mia, who had circled back, smashed a heavy vase over Frank's head. As he crumpled to the floor, she pounced, wrapping a pillowcase around his neck and pulling with all her might. Years of repressed anger erupted in that single moment, twisting her normally gentle face into a mask of fury. Frank wasn't tall, but he was strong. In that life or death struggle, I threw myself on top of him, pinning his arms and legs until his eyes rolled back and he went limp. Mia, what do? We have to call the police. I was panicking, reaching for my phone. Mia slapped it out of my hand. She was panting, her hair a mess, but her eyes blazed with a wildfire. It was a wildfire fierce enough to burn everything down. Riley, she said, we only get one chance. My head was buzzing. What chance? The moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting a serene, beautiful glow on her face. A face I thought that no one could refuse. Riley, she asked, have you ever butchered a pig? The air in the living room turned into solid glass. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. Mrs. Gable stood there in her floral housecoat, her face pinched in indignant fury, holding out the half-eaten slice of sausage on a paper napkin. Nestled in the center of the dark, spiced meat was a jagged, yellowed lump of enamel. My eyes darted to Detective Morgan. The polite, apologetic demeanor he'd worn seconds ago vanished. His posture stiffened. The seasoned cop took over. Let me see that, Mrs. Gable, Morgan said, his voice dropping an octave. He pulled a small evidence bag and a pen from his breast pocket, using the plastic to carefully pluck the object from the meat. He held it up to the harsh light of the ceiling bulb. It was a molar. Half of it had been shattered, likely by the heavy-duty industrial grinder we kept in the smokehouse, but the remaining crown was undeniably, horrifyingly recognizable. Almost broke my Bobby's jaw. Mrs. Gable ranted, oblivious to the sudden, lethal drop in the room's temperature. You girls are using cheap scrap meat. I knew it. What is that, gravel?
Bone.
It's a pig's tooth. Mia's voice cut through the room. I spun around. Mia was leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen, sipping a glass of water. Her face was a mask of utter boredom. There wasn't a tremor in her hand. A pig's tooth? Morgan asked, his eyes narrowing at my sister. Riley's cheap, Mia said, walking over and looking at the bag with mild disgust. She went down to the wholesale market on 4th Street to buy bulk pork. The butcher threw in a frozen pig's head for free to use for the fat and gelatin. Riley chopped it up with a cleaver, but she's an amateur. She must have missed a piece of the jaw when she threw it in the grinder. She looked at Mrs. Gable. We're sorry about Bobby. We'll cover his dentist bill. Mrs. Gable huffed, somewhat deflated by the offer of money.
Well,
you should be careful. Could have killed the boy. I'll just take this anyway, Morgan said quietly, sealing the plastic bag. He slipped it into his pocket. His eyes shifted from Mia to me, lingering for a fraction of a second too long. Health and safety, you know. Can't have people swallowing stray bones. Or teeth. Of course, I managed to say, my throat feeling like sandpaper. Just protocol. Morgan tipped his hat. I'll be in touch, girls. Lock your doors. It's a rough neighborhood these days. When the door clicked shut behind him and Mrs. Gable, the silence returned, heavier than before. My knees gave out. I sank onto the edge of the sofa, burying my face in my hands. He knows, I whispered, the panic finally rising like bile. Mia, he took it. They'll test it. DNA, dental records. Frank's dental records are in the system from his prison stint.
We're dead.
We are going to prison. I felt a cold hand on the back of my neck. I looked up. Mia was looking down at me, her dark eyes entirely unreadable. The fragile, broken girl who had sobbed in the snow 10 years ago was gone. In her place was something carved from ice. They need a route to get a fast DNA pull, she said softly. That was just the crown. It'll take them time to identify it as human, let alone cross-reference it with Frank's dental records. We have 3 days, maybe 4. To do what? Run. To finish it. Mia walked over to the window, pulling the curtain back a fraction of an inch to watch Morgan's cruiser pull away down the cracked asphalt of our dying street. Across the road, the gaping craters of demolished houses looked like open graves. Frank didn't just come here to torture me, Riley, Mia said. You know that. He came here because Vance paid him to. Vance was Sharon Miller's brother. He was the local muscle for the Horizon Development Group. He drove a slick black Escalade, wore suits that cost more than our house, and made sure that people who refused to sell their properties woke up with their gas lines cut or their dogs poisoned. Vance is a businessman, Mia continued, letting the curtain fall. Frank was a liability. A drunk. A loose cannon who went missing right before a major land acquisition. I don't understand, I said. Mia turned to me. If the police find a dead dog, they look for the person who hated the dog. But if they find a dead hitman, they look at the boss who ordered the hit. That night, we didn't sleep. We went down into the cellar beneath the smokehouse. The air was thick with the scent of salt, hickory smoke, and bleach. In the corner sat the heavy-duty meat grinder, a monstrosity of cast iron and churning blades. Next to it were 3 large plastic barrels. We hadn't turned all of Frank into sausage. That was a myth for the neighbors, a way to explain the smells and the noise. Only the soft tissues, mixed with heavy ratios of pork and heavily spiced, made it to the bamboo racks. The rest of him, the heavy bones, the skull, the things the grinder couldn't handle, was dissolved. We had bought 20 gallons of industrial lye the day after the murder. The barrels were currently doing the slow, horrific work of erasing Frank Miller from the earth. We need his belt buckle, Mia said, putting on thick rubber gloves and a respirator mask. And whatever is left of the jaw. I watched, fighting back a wave of violent nausea, as my sister used a long metal hook to dredge the sludge. She was methodical, clinical. She pulled out a heavy, tarnished silver belt buckle, a cheap rodeo replica Frank had worn every day. Then, she retrieved a piece of porous, dissolving bone, a section of the lower mandible. She washed them off in the utility sink, the water running milky white. What are we doing with this? I asked, my voice trembling. We are going to visit a construction site, Mia said. At 2 a.m., the Horizon Development site was a sprawling graveyard of mud and steel. It was located 3 blocks away, exactly where our neighborhood used to be before Vance's bulldozers tore it down. In the center of the site was a massive, freshly dug foundation pit for a luxury condominium, gridded with rebar. A cement mixer was parked nearby, scheduled for the 6 a.m. pour. We moved like shadows. The winter wind howled, biting through our coats, masking the sound of our footsteps. Mia carried a heavy canvas duffel bag. The night Frank disappeared, Mia whispered as we slipped under the chain-link fence, Sharon told the police he went out to meet Vance for a payout. Frank had been bragging at the local bar that he was going to squeeze Horizon Development for double his fee. He said he knew too much about the illegal evictions. How do you know that? I have ears, Riley. And I knew the day would come when I'd need to know everything about him. We reached the edge of the foundation pit. It was a 20-foot drop into a grid of steel and darkness. Tomorrow morning, hundreds of tons of concrete would fill this hole. Mia unzipped the duffel. She took out the belt buckle, the jawbone, and Frank's burner phone, wiped clean of our numbers, but still containing his aggressive text messages to Vance demanding more money. She tossed the items into the deepest corner of the rebar grid. By the time Morgan gets the lab results on that tooth, Mia said, looking down into the abyss, Vance will be pouring the foundation for his sister's new penthouse over Frank's grave. Suddenly, a blinding beam of light hit us. Well, look what the stray cats dragged in. I froze. A heavy engine purred to life. The black Escalade had rolled up to the far side of the fence, its headlights cutting through the darkness. 3 men stepped out. At the center was Vance. He was wearing a tailored wool coat, chewing on an unlit cigar. In his hand was a suppressed pistol. Sharon said you two bitches were acting weird, Vance called out, his boots crunching on the frozen mud as he and his men approached the fence. Said the house smelled like a slaughterhouse. I thought she was just being hysterical. But here you are, trespassing on my site at 2 a.m. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. We were caught. There was no way out. The construction site was surrounded by high fencing, and Vance's men were already moving to flank us. We were just leaving, I said, trying to push Mia behind me. Vance laughed, unlocking the rolling gate and stepping through.
You're not going anywhere, Riley.
You nail-house holdouts have been a thorn in my side for 6 months. And now my idiot brother-in-law goes missing, and my sister is screaming about you making sausages. He stopped a few feet from us, leveling the gun at my chest. Where is he? What did you do to Frank? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Frank tried to shake you down, Vance, Mia said. Her voice was steady, echoing slightly in the cold air. She stepped around me, facing the gun without a flinch. He told us he was coming here to meet you, for a final payout. He said if you didn't pay him double, he was going to tell the police about the arson on 5th Street. Vance's eye twitched. His grip on the gun tightened. You're lying. Frank didn't have the brains to blackmail me. Then why are you holding a gun on 2 orphans in the middle of the night? Mia tilted her head. You killed him, Vance. You buried him here. In the foundation. You brought us here to frame us for it. Vance stared at her, genuinely confused for a split second. What the hell are you talking about? Drop the weapon, Vance. Hands in the air.
Now.
The voice boomed from the darkness behind us. Red and blue lights suddenly flared to life, illuminating the mud, the steel, and the shocked faces of Vance's thugs. Detective Morgan stepped out from behind a stack of steel pipes, his service weapon drawn, and leveled squarely at Vance's head. 2 uniformed officers moved in rapidly from the flanks, shotguns raised. Police.
Drop it.
Vance hesitated, looking at the gun in his hand, then at the cops. He cursed, tossing the pistol onto the mud and raising his hands. Morgan, you've got this wrong. These 2 were trespassing. Shut up, Morgan growled, moving forward to kick the gun away. He slammed Vance against the side of the cement mixer, cuffing him roughly. The other officers tackled Vance's men to the ground. I stood there, gasping for air, the world spinning. How is Morgan here? I looked at Mia. She was staring at Morgan, a faint, almost imperceptible nod passing between them. She called him. Before we left the house, while I was pacing in a panic, Mia had texted Detective Morgan from an anonymous burner. A simple tip. Vance is burying Frank Miller's belongings at the Horizon site tonight. Detective, Mia said, her voice instantly shifting. The cold, calculating killer vanished. Suddenly, she was the terrified, traumatized victim again. Her shoulders slumped, and her voice trembled perfectly. Thank God you're here. He forced us to come here. He told us if we didn't sign the property deed, he'd bury us where he buried Frank. That is a lie. Vance roared, struggling against Morgan's grip. I just got here. I caught them throwing shit into the pit. Morgan didn't look at Vance. He looked down into the foundation pit. He shined his heavy maglite into the grid of rebar. The beam caught the glint of the silver belt buckle and the pale, unmistakable shape of a human jawbone resting in the mud. Morgan's jaw tightened. He looked back up at Vance, his eyes filled with a disgust that went far beyond professional duty. Frank Miller was a piece of garbage, Morgan said softly to Vance. But killing him, dumping him on your own site, and trying to frame the girls he victimized? That's a special kind of stupid, Vance. I didn't kill him. Vance screamed, his slick veneer entirely shattered. They did. Look at them. They're crazy. Take him away, Morgan barked to the uniforms. As they dragged a screaming, cursing Vance toward the cruisers, Morgan holstered his weapon. He stood alone with us by the edge of the pit. The red and blue lights washed over his weathered face. He reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the small plastic evidence bag containing the piece of tooth Mrs. Gable had brought over. My breath caught. This was it. The trap was sprung, but he still had the proof of our guilt. Morgan looked at the tooth. Then he looked at Mia. 10 years ago, Morgan said, his voice barely a rasp over the wind, I carried you to the ambulance. You were so light, like a broken bird. I sat in my cruiser afterward, and I cried. I don't cry often. Mia said nothing. She just watched him. The system failed you, Morgan continued, staring at the plastic bag. Frank did 2 years on a plea deal because the DA didn't want to go to trial. And then he came back. And the system was going to fail you again. He stepped closer to the edge of the pit. I ran this tooth over to a buddy at the private dental lab a few hours ago, Morgan said. He wasn't looking at us anymore. He was looking at the dark mud below. He told me it was human. Said it had traces of industrial lye and pork fat on it. Funny combination, that. I felt my legs giving way, but Mia grabbed my arm, her grip like a vice, holding me upright. Morgan turned the bag over in his hands. If I turn this in, 2 girls who have been to hell and back go to prison for the rest of their lives. A corrupt developer gets their land. And Frank Miller wins. He let out a long, slow breath, his breath pluming white in the freezing air. But if I don't turn it in, Morgan said, Vance goes away for murder. Horizon Development is investigated by the feds for racketeering and burying a body. The harassment stops. And the victims get to survive. Morgan unsealed the plastic bag. He tipped it over the edge of the foundation pit. The broken piece of tooth tumbled through the air, vanishing into the deep, dark grid of rebar, landing somewhere near the jawbone. Tomorrow it would all be encased in concrete. Forever. Morgan crumpled the empty plastic bag and shoved it back into his pocket. He turned to face us. His eyes were hard, but there was a deep, sorrowful understanding in them.
Go home, Riley.
Go home, Mia, he said quietly. Pack your things. Sell the house to the highest bidder when the dust settles. Get out of this town. And don't ever look back. He walked away, his heavy boots crunching on the frozen earth, leaving us alone in the dark. 2 months later. The demolition of our house took less than an hour. We stood on the sidewalk with our suitcases, watching the bulldozer tear through the living room, collapsing the roof into the kitchen. The smokehouse out back had already been leveled to dust. With Vance indicted for first-degree murder and Horizon Development facing a massive federal racketeering probe, the property values had plummeted. A rival developer swooped in, offering a generous buyout to avoid bad press. We took the money. Sharon Miller had tried to sue us, claiming we were involved, but the police dismissed her as a grieving, delusional widow. The last I heard, she had moved to a trailer park out of state, broke and alone. I looked at Mia. She was wearing a new coat, a bright, pristine white trench coat. Her hair was cut short, framing a face that had finally regained some color. But the softness in her eyes, the innocence that Frank had stolen, and the grief that had followed, was never coming back. She wasn't broken anymore. She was something forged, something sharp. Are you ready? I asked, pulling my collar up against the spring chill. Mia watched the excavator crush the wardrobe where Frank had hidden that night. She watched the splintered wood turn to kindling. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of her mouth. I'm starving, she said. We turned our backs on the wreckage, picked up our bags, and walked toward the train station. We were orphans. We were murderers. We were monsters. But as we walked side by side into the bright, morning sun, I squeezed my sister's hand. It was warm. And for the first time in 10 years, we were completely free.